let's look at how we can adjust a gradient and also to apply a simple drop shadow. So let's manipulate a gradient. So what I have is text. I have MMDT, which I have converted to outlines. So now I have a group of 4 objects. So I'm going to ungroup this, deselect, and that will allow me to click just one of these letters. So this is just like an object. This is a simple object. So I'm going to zoom in here right onto my T. So right now I have a fill of white, a stroke of black. Let's go ahead and put one of our gradients in there. And I want to choose to alter this gradient. So I can choose a color. I can start mixing some colors up here. Now the minute I do that, I go up to my color panel, my object turns to that solid color. Okay, so it is still selected. It thinks, oh, you want a solid fill. So what I'm going to do is deselect for a minute. Let's go back to this gradient and let's see if we can't choose to alter some of our colors. And to do that, I'm going to just double click on, double click on the stop to drag and get a couple of colors. Let's do a cyan. Remember cyan in magenta, yellow, and K for key color. Those are printing for a CMYK is for print. And let's do a cyan to a yellow. Okay, so this maybe is the gradient that I want. I'm going to save this gradient by dragging it to my swatches. Now I'm going to click on my T and I'm going to click that gradient and there it is. Okay, so say I want this to be in a different direction. With linear, I can change my angle here. So I could do a 90-degree angle and you can see how it flipped the gradient to go 90 degrees. I can also do it at an angle at a 45. Okay, so whatever I want. But say I want a little bit more control on that. I'm going to have my object selected that has that gradient fill. Go over to my toolbar and choose the gradient tool. This will allow me to see the gradient control bar. Okay, that's this line that's going right through my object. When I'm over it, I actually see quite a bit of information regarding my gradient. For instance, I can actually change the length of this gradient. I can change where it's going to go. So just by clicking and moving this, you can see how it's flowing through that object a bit differently. This would be the same thing as taking this gradient tool and dragging my own. See how I can just click and drag my own? And if I extend or start dragging outside of the borders, that means that right here where my cursor is, that's where my gradient is going to stop. And just whatever is visible within this window of my object is what I'm going to see of that gradient. So I can change that length. I can actually move the direction. I can change the angle of this as well. Okay, here I'm scooting it in so it's not as long, and here I'm getting my rotation. Just watch your cursor because it depends where you're at. See where my mouse is out here, nothing. When I'm here, I'm able to extend the length of my gradient, and if I'm dragged just a little bit off of the point, I can then rotate it. Okay. What the other information I get here, my diamond, that indicates my midpoint. So this is where my 50-50 blend of my color on either side are going to be. And I can also click on my color stop here. By double clicking it, I bring up the information to change the color, which is kind of a fun thing. So say I wanted to back off on the cyan just a bit, I can reduce that amount. I also can add a color stop. Maybe I wanted to have a little bit of a purplish tint in there. So you can do a lot of really fun things with just that gradient control bar that will pop up with your gradient tool. Okay, so let's say now, I'm going to back up here, that's just one. When I click all of my objects here, remember M, M, D, and T are all objects. They're not text, it's all objects. I'm going to use my selection and drag a marquee selection to select all of those 4 objects and then go back to that gradient that I saved previously. What happens is the gradient will fill those multiple objects, but fill them as though they're individual. What if I want my gradient to start over here on this M object and end over on the T object? Go to your gradient tool and click and drag across all of those selected objects, and that gradient will extend through the whole the whole thing, acting as though it's one rather than 4 individual. Okay. So let's get rid of the stroke. Again, I'm going to marquee to select everything. Go to my stroke, bring that on top, click None, which we call the stroke of none or a fill of none. What if I want to have a little bit of a drop shadow? This is kind of the simple way of creating a drop shadow. Again, I marquee select everything. I do a copy, Control C, or go up to your edit menu and choose copy. And then I choose to either paste it in back, or I can paste in front and then select the back. However your thought process works. I'm going to paste it in back because then what's selected should be pasted in back. I'm going to choose black as a fill. Actually, let's swap that. Oh, and it's in front. Let's do this. Select everything here. And I held down my Shift key this time with my selection tool to get those 3. And I do a right click. Right click brings up my context sensitive menu, and I can go to Arrange and Send to Back. There we go. So now it's in the back. I might have to mess around with that if it doesn't work for you. And so now what's in the back is my fill of black letters, and I'm going to use my keyboard arrow keys, right a couple, down a couple, however far you want that to go. And that's kind of a full way of doing a drop shadow, really, really basic. Notice I've got something kind of almost 3D going on here because I have a stroke of a gradient on that black. Probably want to take that off too. So I'm going to again hold down my Shift key and select just those background letters. You have to be very careful on where you're selecting, and it may help to zoom in close to see it. So there we go. There's a simple drop shadow, and also the ability to put a gradient in multiple objects and to manipulate that gradient a bit.